Welcome to another Village Torah portion discussion with me, your host, Rabbi Drew. This week's Torah portion is Tavo, and we are still very much in a whole series of addresses by Moses, and this has a lot in it. I would say one key piece that we discussed a couple of years ago here on Village Torah involves something that you may remember from the Passover Haggadah. Interesting piece in there about first fruits. A lot of the Torah portion actually has to do with various blessings and curses that occur, but towards the end, this is what I want to explore today a little bit. The final 8 verses of this week's Torah portion are quite interesting. We read in Deuteronomy chapter 29, verses 1 through 8, the final 8 verses of this week's Torah portion. Moses summoned all of Israel and said to them, "You have seen all that the Lord did before your very eyes in the land of Egypt to Pharaoh and to all his courtiers and to all his country, to his whole country. The wondrous feats that you saw with your own eyes, those prodigious signs and marvels. Yet to this day, the Lord has not given you a mind to understand, nor eyes to see, nor ears to hear. I led you through the wilderness 40 years. The clothes on your back did not wear out, nor did the sandals on your feet. You had no bread to eat, and neither wine nor beer to drink, that you might know that I, the Lord, am your God. When you reached this place, King Sichon of Heshbon and King Og of Bashan came out to engage us in battle, but we defeated them. We took their land and gave it to the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh as their heritage. Therefore, observe faithfully all the terms of this covenant, that you may succeed in all that you undertake." For me, what really stands out, a lot in here, but for me, what stands out are those 2 verses in there. Verses 4 and 5, literally the middle 2 verses of these 8 verses of clothes not wearing out, sandals not wearing out, neither having bread, wine, nor beer to consume. This is fascinating. Of course, we know that it is a desert. It's not surprising there would be neither bread nor beer nor wine for consumption. A little bit surprising, I will say. The clothes not wearing out, sandals not wearing out, 40 years of trudging through desert. You don't have to go anywhere. Even a year, I imagine these things would wear out. It's quite a stark and striking assertion. These did not wear out. So I wanted to unpack these 2 verses, through a few different medieval commentators, Jewish medieval biblical commentators, to help us get some new perspectives, deepen our understanding of these verses in this week's Torah portion. So we have Rabbi Moses, son of Nachman, who is more familiarly named by his Hebrew acronym of Ramban, and he lived basically in the 13th century, being born in 1194 and dying in 1270. So really active in the early to mid 13th century. And he writes on this 5th verse about neither eating bread nor wine nor beer to drink. So the meaning thereof is, you have not eaten sufficiently thereof that you should be able to live by it. For their principal sustenance was the manna. So that's an interesting assertion by Ramban here, because he's saying, look, it's not as if they went 40 years starving. No. It's just they had neither beer, wine, nor bread, but they did have manna, which God supplied. Okay, that you might know that I am the eternal, your God, who keeps you alive miraculously. Now, it could not mean that they did not eat bread at all, right? That's pretty surprising. Not eating bread for 4 decades? Really? Scripture says of Moses, I ate neither bread nor drank water. For on some occasions, Israel did have bread in the wilderness, as it is written, you shall sell me food for money that I may eat, and give me water for money that I may drink, as the children of Esau that dwell in Seir and the Moabites that dwell in Ar did unto me. Now our rabbis mention that the merchants of the peoples of the world brought them various foods in the desert. Now it is further possible that from the time the manna descended until they came to Seir, they did not eat bread at all, for they traveled through the great and dreadful wilderness. But in the 40th year, they approached inhabited land, and it was said to them, you are to pass through the border of your brethren, the children of Esau. You shall purchase food of them. There it is written, these 40 years the eternal your God has been with you. You have lacked nothing. And from that time on, the Edomites and the Moabites met them with food and drink, and prominent Israelites would buy from them for pleasure, not for necessity, not for society, because their principal sustenance was still the manna. Okay, fascinating insight here of where did this food come from? Where did they get it? Well, they still had some opportunities. Now we get to another early medieval biblical commentator by the name of Rabbi Jacob ben Asher, who lived from 1269 to 1343. And he wrote on this, he wrote, in order, what is this? In order that you should know that I am the Lord your God, in order to convince you beyond any doubt that I am the Lord your God. Moses means that the Lord had kept them alive by miraculous means during all these years. The word lechem, which typically we translate as bread, in this paragraph is not to be understood in the same way as when Moses told the people that during the 40 days he spent on Mount Sinai, he had neither eaten lechem nor drunk wine. Now, this is what he is doing. It's not that he has no idea about what we just read of Rabbi Moses, son of Nachman. Quite the opposite. He is very aware of what was written. So now he's not just swatting it away. He is directly responding to what we previously just read. Moses meant that he had not eaten nor drunk anything during his stay on the mountain, had led an angel-like existence. The people of Israel, even while in the desert, had tasted bread on occasion, such as when they had bought flour from some surrounding nation, but they had not needed it for their survival. Moses himself is on record as reminding the people that the Edomites had sold them food and drink. Our sages in the Babylonian Talmud have said that the merchants of the whole region were offering to sell food and drink to the Israelites in the desert. It is also possible that the period when the Israelites subsisted exclusively on a diet of manna began 30 days after the Exodus, when the manna fell for the first time, and it continued into the 40th year when the Edomites sold them food and drink, around the time when they made war against Sihon, after which they possessed normal lands, land on which crops were growing and on which cattle were grazing. At that time, God had said to Moses, command the people you are passing through the territory of your brethren, the children of Esau, you may buy food from them, and you may dig for water in their soil. In that context, the Torah had also written that God had blessed them during the 40 years they traversed a fearsome desert. From that point onwards, the people had enjoyed access to normal food and drink, but presumably in very limited quantities. Whatever normal food they consumed, or the wealthy ones among them consumed, was in the nature of indulging themselves, not something they relied on for survival. Their basic food continued to be the manna until they crossed the river Jordan. So certainly some interesting acrobatics he is trying to pull off, saying, well, clearly they had some of this, but maybe not all of it. Okay. And finally, we get to one final one that, by the way, I will say this is such an interesting, much more complicated, much more nuanced take than what we saw previously. Now, finally, we have a much shorter here from Rabbi Ovadia ben Jacob Sforno, 15th, 16th century commentator who lived from 1475 to 1550. He writes, however, now that you have seen the vastness of his love for you, and he has brought you to take possession of the lands of Sichon and Og, so that you are able to sustain yourselves by your own efforts, the time has come that you will finally possess the necessary sagacity, a heart which is knowledgeable. Now, of course, okay, that's really lovely. But really to try to figure out what's going on here. What is going on with, what do you mean no food, no water, no, that's insane. Well, actually, of course, water, but no food, no bread, no wine, no beer. Those are staples of human existence. How could it be? So clearly, Ramban is trying to figure out, what does this mean? But I don't know about you, and I'm very curious to hear from you, but I actually like this nuanced approach by Rabbi Jacob ben Asher here of saying, look, there was some, maybe they bought from, maybe it was a certain time, right? What are the parameters of the time? Was it really all 40 years they didn't? Well, what about at the beginning? And what about at the end? Really interesting takes here. It's not as if they were totally devoid of bread, nor wine, nor beer during these 40 years. I hope this was a helpful exploration of these sort of the final 8 verses of this week's Torah portion, but more specifically, those middle 2 verses of these 8. Curious assertion. All right. Well, hopefully that was helpful. I'm curious to hear your thoughts and your takes on this closing out of this week's Torah portion. And thank you so much for watching. Before we go, I want to just acknowledge that all Jewish life and programming here at Majestic Care Cedar Village are supported through the lovely generosity of Jewish Home of Cincinnati. Thank you so much. And with that, I want to say thank you so much for watching, and Shabbat Shalom.